when they said, come let us go to the house of the Lord. I was glad when they say, come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.
Welcome to the Church with No Walls podcast. I am your host, Ryan Dearbone, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by I call him a mentor and a friend and a very, very knowledgeable man. He is a professor emeritus at Western Kentucky University here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. His name is Dr. John Hardin, and he is going to join us today to talk about Black history and the church. So, first of all, welcome, Dr. Hardin. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here, Ryan.
So, Dr. Hardin, I know you have done a lot of research in the area of Black history here in Kentucky, as well as in general. So, your wealth of knowledge is going to be very much appreciated in this. And so, obviously, in this podcast, we talk a lot about religion. We talk about the church inside and outside the walls of the church. So, Dr. Hardin, just I guess to set the table. And sometimes it almost can become cliche, but we talk about how a lot of the history of Black America, especially here in the United States, comes from the church. So can you talk a little bit about why that is, why the church and Black America are so synonymous with each other when it comes to the growth throughout history?
Part of that can be traced back almost to the beginnings of Black communities. As early as 1779, there were Black churches organized around slave communities and eventually in free communities where Africans who were imported were free. They formed their own separate churches because if you went to a white church, you were always put in a segregated portion of the church, and you had a special message to be observant to your masters. So when you call the Black church, there's two types of Black churches. Churches operated by slaveholding populations and churches operated by slaves themselves, the folk church. And many of these were conducted after the days of work. They would get together and have their own fellowship. Sometimes the Black churches would be simply under a tree. If they didn't have a building, they would gather together at a specific spot on a farm and have worship. If they could have a hut, or a small older building, they would worship there. And there they would at least pray. Those of them who had access to scriptures could talk about, were we similar to the Hebrews when they were enslaved? And what did they do? What didn't they do? And it comes down to the leader of the religious community having an opportunity to, first of all, understand scriptures. They had to memorize what they heard if they had a chance to hear any scriptures. And then they had to relate that to their own circumstances. When we get to free communities, particularly in the North, the concept of the Black church is one of keeping the community together. And then by the time we get to the 19th century, it becomes a place for abolitionist sentiment, anti-slavery sentiment. So the church goes through various iterations, various versions. The first church was not really organized as a church, but more a fellowship of Christian believers. Some would argue that some of the Black churches would bring with them some Muslim traditions, because many of the Africans imported were imported from Islamic areas of West Africa. And it would last for a while, but then would gradually fade away as Christianity, or at least the slaveholders' version of Christianity, would take its place. And when we get to Latin America, that's another whole story. Caribbean, Latin America, the church is going to be different because of the Catholic presence there. And of course, in the islands, you're going to have some of the traditional West African religions, which some people would later accuse of being voodoo and this and that. That's another whole discussion with another couple of hours of sort of discussion on that. And I think there's a colleagues up in the history department at Western who could probably speak at length on that. But the important thing to remember about the Black church, it goes through variations of being of not being organized into being organized, to being formally structured. Like I said, the Baptist church dates from a Baptist congregation, one of them 1779. I'm familiar with the AME congregation that evolved from Richard Allen. Richard Allen, of course, and Absalom Jones were two individuals who were at St. George's Church in Philadelphia, and they were praying at the altar one time, and the blacks who were Methodists in Philadelphia, and Allen himself was a person who had been a slave, who received his freedom and believed in Methodism. He said, well, we want to pray at the altar. And the sexton of the church said, nope, you got to get up. You aren't supposed to come down and pray in the same place we would pray. So eventually what Richard Allen would do, and Absalom Jones, the two leaders, would break away from St. George's Methodist Church in Philadelphia and would decide to form their own church. These two individuals would wind up being the founders of two churches. Absalom Jones would be an Episcopal priest, would form a Black Episcopal church there in Philadelphia, and Richard Allen would form a Methodist church called Bethel. And that church congregation still exists, by the way. It is the oldest continuously owned piece of property that I know of by Blacks, dating from the late 1700s. They purchased some land in Philadelphia, and that particular piece of property they still own. And by the way, it's just about 3 blocks from Constitution Hall. I've been there. Mother Bethel, as it's called, is located in some very expensive property today. At the time, it was not that, but today it is rare to see a Black church surrounded by all of these expensive condos and businesses, but that's the case. So the Black church in many communities is not only property, but it's a source where people could meet, they could organize. Sometimes they were political, sometimes they were spiritual, sometimes they took care of the needy. Today, I think there's an emphasis upon looking at the Black church as all of these things. You can be political, you can serve the needs of the people if they need food, if they need counsel, if they need guidance. The minister was one who was familiar with scripture. The deacons, or the Methodist church, they were called stewards, but still elders. All of these titles, it doesn't matter. Whoever the leaders of the church were, they were considered the moral force. And I think that's what Dr. King was doing. He was a little bit of all of that. He was both a moral leader, he was he could educate within the Christian context, but he was also an activist. So the church served a lot of purposes. It was a social service agency, it was a religious venue, it was a place that people could go and seek some comfort. And this is why, in many instances, churches were attacked in the civil rights movement, blown up. I think here in Bowling Green, we have, Mount Hebrew.
Mount Hebrew,
that was blown up during the civil rights movement. And so this was not unusual, that if the Black church got out of line, angry whites, and I'll say it that way, angry whites would take their vengeance out on, not all whites. In some instances later on, we're going to see some whites join Black churches in what they were doing, and they would understand the significance of the Black church. But, one of the things to always remember when we talk about the Black church, then, today, and in the future, it evolves. It does not stay the same. It cannot stay the same. Each period that we go through is different. This is not the revolutionary period. This is not the early national period. This is not the Civil War. This is not the post-Civil War. Now we're in what I would call the post-Civil Rights era, where all of the good things of the 60s and 70s are now being reviewed and saying, do we really want all the things that we allowed to happen? And so there are those politicians, And I'm gonna frame it very carefully because, as Oprah says, you know who
Mhm.
is starting to sue everybody who says something negative about him.
Mhm.
At the recent Grammy Awards, he has threatened a certain person, elected officials, threatening to sue the host of the Grammys for something said about him.
Mhm.
So I'll frame it that way. If we talk about that person, we'll say, you know who, and many of you know whose followers have become very much concerned about social institutions and making it divisive towards whites, by blacks. And that's problematic. It's very problematic for the future. Younger people need to understand that circumstances today are reflective on what happened yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And so, what you have to do today is look at your institutions, not what's on Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, or social media. We have to look at our existing institutions, particularly the spiritual ones, for guidance. Um, your website is not going to give you correct information necessarily. It can be a help, but it comes back to two magic words: common sense. Common sense you cannot buy on your iPhone or your Android device. It comes from listening to people, then being very careful at what they're saying and have them to back it up. Anyway, let me take a. I'll shut up. Did that answer your question
That
somewhere along
does.
the line?
That does. And so you mentioned being part of a post-civil rights era right now. A lot of young people, black kids, era, they're using social media. They're on TikTok, they're on Facebook, Pinterest, all these different things. And churches are starting to use that as a way to either get younger people or keep younger people.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you think is that the best way to get them and keep them? Is that a way? Is there something being lost by being able to, like, by the fact that we're able to have a Zoom conversation, by having church worship, to have those elements of church only be through social media or through live streaming? Do you think that that's, especially with the climate that we're in now, we lose something of the black church, or do we gain something?
you, we can do, but we can lose them and gain them if we follow up with what we say. It's not a matter of what you say, but it's what you do after you articulate something. You're going to have to, in a sense, follow up. Uh, it's one thing to say you're going to take care of the community. It's another to make sure that your church is participating in social activities and civic activities like the NAACP, like social and fraternal organizations that help the community. It's one thing to be a member, it's another thing to actually do something. Um, uh, I think each of what we call the Divine Nine organizations have been in existence, uh, most of them been in existence over a century. Uh, and they've had a track record of participating in the civil rights movement, post civil rights movement. Now it's important for all of these organizations to make sure that people are registered to vote if there are opportunities for jobs. What you see on the internet and social media is only good if they can follow up with what they do. What is it? What's the old saying? Do as I, what is it? Do as I say, but not as I do. Or
Mhm.
now it's do as I say and do as I do. In
Yeah.
other words, uh, pick up and do what you say you're supposed to do. And if you say you're going to do it, do it. Uh, and I see some churches have done that. The difficulty, what's going on today, is some people are. It's easier to do what we're doing to get us an online device and do this digital interaction, but it's hard to do it physically in person. Um, Growing up, obviously, I'm 77. I didn't have all this stuff until recently. But in many instances, church was actually physically going there, seeing the minister doing something in the community. That was the key. Today, we want convenience. Even the current generation, they want something quick, fast, and easy. What is it? Spirituality through in the drive-through.
Yes.
You know, they want to speak into it. All right, I got my spirituality. Boom. Later, I'm going to go hoop, or I'm going out to a party. I'm getting something to drink. Well, I've got my spiritual thing on Sunday. You only do spiritual stuff on Sundays, maybe Wednesday night and Sunday. The rest of the week, I got other things to do. I got to work. I got to do this. I got to do that. Spiritual stuff is put up on a shelf and forgotten about. And so, what the Black church at one time says, some people would tell me, and that in the church, the Black church, you had stuff on Wednesday night, obviously Sunday. There was events on Saturdays. There was some churches you had stuff every night of the week if need be. And if you didn't go to one, you went to two others. And that helped to develop moral strength to survive racism, to survive what I call the quiet race, the quiet terror of racial discrimination. People don't understand, at least in my generation, I did. You could be terrorized by racism and no one would ever know it because it was quiet, it was subtle, it was every day. It was if in the segregation period, it's how you rode the bus, it's how you were treated at the store. In some places, you were looked at. Okay, boy, are you going to steal something, or this or that? It's how you were treated. When you went to the church, you had a chance to release that, to get guidance, sometimes from a pastor who could help you to get through that week. But today we just don't have that anymore. You're on your own. And typically, for some of the generation, they have to learn how to cope with that quiet terror, which is still going on, by the way. It's a lot more sophisticated. Now they're saying that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is hurtful to white people. And I'm trying to say, give me a break. What were we living through when we were legally Jim Crowed, that is segregated, when you were beaten, women were raped, men were arrested for walking down the street in certain places. That wasn't divisive. That was okay because it was socially acceptable among whites. But for blacks, it was what we had to live through. Today, we can protest. I'm thinking protests are almost being ignored to a certain degree. We can sort of see what happened in Minnesota. That was a series of protests only when two whites were killed. All of a sudden, there's a big protest. In the past, if we saw George Floyd, we saw some other cases where there were protests and there were responses, but not quite what I'm seeing now. These are massive sort of demonstrations forcing the government to do something. And we sort of wonder, where is the church in all of this? Are we, particularly in the Black church, supportive of those individuals wanting to be immigrants, wanting to be citizens? Are we supportive of fair treatment for those individuals? Many of the people being, in a sense, arrested, taken, pulled over, harassed by federal officials, were encouraged to come here to work. And now we're sort of putting them in the same position, what one elected official called black jobs. Remember? Certain elected officials, who talked about these people are taking black jobs. I wish I could ask him, what does black jobs mean? Does that mean the lowest paid level of jobs in society? And so you're thinking that the brown-skinned, Spanish-speaking people who are coming to this country are wanting to take the lowest paying jobs that are reserved for black people? That poses a real question mark. Don't have an answer, but it makes you think just a little bit.
So, Dr. Hardin, so you had mentioned how it doesn't seem like the church is as involved. The black church isn't as involved now, especially in social issues and political issues. Because at one point, especially the 60s and 70s, kind of as you mentioned, that was the church was the storefront. That's where you had a lot of your political, your social justice movements coming out of the church. That was the house for the church. And I mean, to me, we're both members of the local NAACP. We just don't see that anymore. Where did that disconnect come from? Where it went from being where the black church was in a lot of places the leader. It worked hand in hand with civil rights organizations, with political organizations in order to kind of be at the forefront of these issues. And now we're seeing in some places and in some spaces it taking either a small step back or a larger step back when facing issues.
One thing to remember is that in many instances, that black church is confronted with other kinds of challenges. Black churches today depend upon memberships in many urban communities. Some of those communities have middle class, conservative, black conservatives. One of the things that people fail to really understand, the black conservative movement, supportive of major conservative organizations, aren't all that keen on being activism. They're saying we can resolve a lot of the problems if more people are employed, have opportunities, more engaged in the traditional American system, instead of being involved in things that aren't so legal. And so they're going to say the purpose of the pastor, the church, and the religious organization is to preach the word, preach the gospel, preach whatever denominational tradition that you have, not to become involved in political civic activities. That's another platform. Other churches within the black community, and there is diversity in terms of the black church. More activist churches see this as a need. It's sort of amazing. The U.S. Senator from Georgia, Senator Warnock, is a pastor, a very active pastor in Atlanta, and he inherits that tradition coming out of Atlanta. And so there are other pastors who take that tradition of the church being into social activism as necessary, because if they don't do it, it won't get done. So it sort of depends on the leadership of the church and the focus of the church, particularly the mega churches. This is one thing that in the previous decades, the phenomenon of the mega church was simply not there. Now we're starting to see some black churches with multiple campuses, with lead pastors driving not just a Cadillac, but Mercedes-Benz, driving very expensive vehicles, living the lifestyle of a corporate executive, having all kinds of ventures, which may or may not benefit to the leadership. It will benefit the church. But some of these churches are commercial, big operations. I know of one church within the AME Church. It owns basically a city block, but that's property is involved in a lot of things: a school, education, training. Yes, they own property, but they're putting that back in the community. So it's a different period where money has entered the church, both for the good and the bad. The leadership has to understand that the church can be for good in terms of spiritual growth, spiritual development, and it can address what I call the secular world by using those resources for good. It only becomes problematic when that same leadership says, in order to get more stuff, we have to go along and play with those forces that might not like us. Some would say conservative movements that are sort of hostile to what someone called progressive ideas. And all of these ideas make it sort of messy for all of us who are not clergy, who are not running the physical operations, what I call corporate religion. Okay, there's spiritual religion structures that involve the members who pray, worship, go to Sunday school. They want to get the word. They want to sing. They want to do good things for the community. And then there's the corporate church, where management boards. I don't care what denomination you have. You're going to have either a deacon or an elder or a trustee or any of these officials that run the church operations. We're going to say, well, we can't do this because if we do that, we're going to lose some income. And we need the income to keep the lights on, to pay the electric bill, to pay the insurance, to keep the building in good shape, to keep all of our programs in shape. So you have the corporate church, the spiritual church, and then in the middle, you have the people. How do they fit in? Are they getting the message that's spiritually related to the sacred text, but at the same time, they're trying to deal with these man-made issues? I mean, I'm still struggling. New Testament, Old Testament, it doesn't talk about how much money we're going to raise and a prosperity gospel. Mm-hmm. Scripture doesn't talk about prosperity gospel. Prosperity, wealth sometimes meant having measures of oil or having food to give, or you hear in the Old Testament, they were chaffing the wheat, and they're talking about simple things, food, simple things. Today we talk about how much money you're going to bring in, and when you get that money, well, what we can do with the money. We can spread the gospel if you make a donation of $1,000. Now, come on,
right?
And having ATMs in the church. So when you join the church, they want to know, how much money do you make? Now, next Sunday, you're gonna have to give this. You're gonna have to do that. And I'm saying, scratch my head. Isn't this sort of a perversion of what the scripture is, at least in the Christian denomination, what you're supposed to do with what's given to you? It only talks about a tithe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep,
what a tithe is.
Yeah.
And we twist that tithe around to be into dollars. So if you give X amount of dollars, I'm done. I'm out of here. You don't have to give any more.
Give your percentage.
Yeah, it said right. You're 10%. I'm done. I'm out of here. History. Whereas in the original basic church, what you gave sometimes was more than 10%. Sometimes people gave their lives, which is 100%. That's a full commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've turned the word church upside down into many different ways today. We should know what it is, but we don't know. At one point, when you said Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, there was a general assumption this was a group of ministers who were leading to fight for civil rights. When we say the names of the organizations now, we sort of, what does that mean? What do they do? Are they just organizations with the executive directors pursuing a particular agenda? We don't know. For the average individual who's not a clergyman, might be involved in the local church, but then these big denominational bodies, whether it's conventions. I know in the Baptist church you have conventions, correct?
Yep, we do. Yep.
And each of those conventions play an important pivotal role. Historically, the Baptist church prides itself on each congregation having a level of independence to determine what they want to do, when they want to do it. Yep. And they can be successful. But then you get associations who, in a sense, play important political roles. And so you sort of wonder, what's going on? Is it clear exactly what organizations are doing for the local churches? The local churches are critical. If people are going to continue, younger people are faced with a dilemma. Do we buy into what mom, dad, grandpa were involved in? Why do we need the church? That's the big question. Do we need the church in the 21st century? Is it going to be replaced by an iPhone
Yeah.
or an Android device.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're talking about moving those devices into the next level, where you don't have a device, you simply wear glasses and all that stuff comes in through your glasses.
Yeah.
You sort of wonder what's going on. How do we deal with that? Does the church need to adapt, or does it need to remain consistent in its moral and philosophical foundations? One of the things I had as a college student, we were required at our college to take 12 hours of theology and 14 hours of philosophy. And it wasn't just one denomination. We were learning other kinds of things. And you were asked to understand, do you really understand why you believe something? In other words, you were forced to do some serious thinking, because once you leave that college campus, you're on your own. You're going to have to figure out, is this the right way to go or not? And same way with the church. Once the pastor, the preacher, the evangelist, once they get through preaching the word, is that going to stick when they leave the church building? Or same way, if the church is delivered via what we're doing right now through the technological world, is it going to stick? Are there examples of it sticking today? That's the big question. Younger people aren't going to listen to old gray heads anymore. They're going to listen to each other. They're going to look on the web. Is the web a safe place to get accurate information? How do you prove what's being said in the platforms of the social media? How do we prove that? You have to have something to back up what you say. And that's the dilemma. Not only for the Black church, all churches are facing that. Because younger people say, we don't need the church. I got money. I don't need you guys. And if it doesn't work for me, I'll go to something else. This is why so many younger people said, skip the church, I'll go get high. I will either get some chemical or something liquid and avoid all that. And it'll numb me to the world. And that's the dilemma I think that the church faces today. They faced it in the past, but today it's faster, it's quicker. It starts early. By the time you're in elementary school, younger people are already equipped to deal with the platform we're on right now. And they're better at it than all of us older ones. They can handle it in a New York minute, which is about 30 seconds, 10 seconds. And so what we have to do as those who are senior is to constantly look at where the church is, encourage younger people to think about it as a positive influence in their lives.
We'll continue our conversation with Dr. John Hardin, Professor Emeritus at Western Kentucky University, on our next edition of the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and as always, take care and be blessed.
Come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.